So this is important. I live in New Zealand. Farming's a big thing. We produce 42% food surplus in New Zealand. So how do you say that? We have 5 million people live in New Zealand, and we make enough food for 7 million people, roughly. A little bit more than 7 million, 7 and a bit million. So we have enough spare food to feed 2 million people in New Zealand. What food is it that's mostly in surplus? I presume it's going to be meat and a little bit of fish and a lot of milk powdered milk. We have a lot of factories around New Zealand. We have a lot of farms. Over the last few decades, a lot of other types of farms have been converted to dairy farming. We have a lot of cattle. We have very mild climate. It's not too hot, not too cold. We get a lot of rain. We have a lot of good, relatively flat and easy country where you can have a dairy farm. And we also have high country farms which traditionally have grown sheep, and I think they grow sheep meat, and I think New Zealand's probably a pretty big sheep meat exporter. We probably export beef as well. I don't know. I can look at all those things. But what I do know is that we sell billions of dollars worth of milk powder. Milk powder is one of the biggest things, okay? But I also know, because I've got a science degree and I like to understand science, and my science degree isn't I did major in computer science, but I also did physics and chemistry and environmental physics, industrial chemistry, psychology. Okay, so I've got a broad electronics, other things, logic. I know a lot about fertiliser. I did industrial chemistry, but also I live in New Zealand. I lived on a farm when I was a kid, so I just know a lot of stuff about fertiliser. I know that a lot of the fertiliser comes from rock phosphate, and New Zealand, when I was a kid, it came from Nauru, which is a small Pacific island nation. I don't know, I think they mined the whole island, you know? Like, I don't know what their reserves are or whether much still comes from Nauru. Another place where there's a lot of rock phosphate fertiliser is on the northern coast of Africa. I'm going to say Morocco, or it's eastern Morocco. There's a lot of rock phosphate there, and I think also Russia for some reason. I think there's a lot of rock phosphate in Russia. I'm not sure about that. I only heard that recently. I didn't know much about it. But Morocco and Nauru, Pacific, well, coastal rocky island kind of thing. Why? It's because phosphates come out of the sea. How do they come out of the sea and get transported on top of rocky outcrops and rocky islands? Bird colonies. Birds eat fish, and the fish bones, I think it's the fish bones, have phosphates in it. And, you know, like seagulls, just saying seabirds in general, I'm just going to say seagulls because that's an easy way to think about it. They eat the fish out of the sea, and they have nesting places, and they hang out in big groupings for safety. Seagulls have a group security policy. They hang out in groups, and that way they can protect their young, and they can sufficiently patrol and keep away from predators. Often the predators, the rocky outcrops or the end of a cliff, or the, you know, it's very desolate. Often it's desolate and nothing else can live there. You know, cats and things that eat seagulls aren't going to hang out there because there's nothing. The seagulls only hang out there during the nesting time, and there's nothing to eat all the rest of the time, so there's not an ability to sustain predators between breeding cycles. How do I know all that? I'm just interested in that. I've been to some of these places, been on ecotourism tours, and understand how that works. It's pretty easy. You can work it out. You can find out about it. So it's interesting. I think that's interesting. So phosphates come out of the sea. They come from the bones in the fish, I believe. How do the phosphates get into the bones of the fish? The fish eat other fish or zooplankton, smaller little animals, and those creatures have phosphates in them. I think they eat algae and seaweed. And why does that algae and seaweed have phosphates in it? Because the phosphates are in the ocean, they're just in the salty water. That salty water, it's not just sodium chloride, it's a whole lot of different salts. And, a lot of the other salts are only present in tiny percentages, parts per million or parts per billion, but that's okay. If little aquatic seaweeds and algae, they're technically called algae, although seaweeds, the algae absorb the phosphates out of the seawater. And so what it is it's sort of like that many tons of seaweed produce a couple of tons of small fish, and a couple of tons of small fish are eaten by a small number of seagulls, and then the seagull manure, we'll put it that way, gets left in the nesting area of where all the baby seagulls hatch out, the seagull chicks, and that's where they're raised, and all of the waste from the baby seagulls and the adult seagulls builds up in time, and over hundreds or thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, the rocks grow into a giant pile of rock phosphate with the phosphates from the seagulls. That's how it gets there. So there might be some areas, I'm not sure if in Morocco, if seabirds still live there. They probably do. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. I haven't been to the southern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. I've been to Italy and Spain and France. So I have been to the coast on the northern side of the Mediterranean Sea. I presume everywhere there's a sea, there's going to be some seagulls or seabirds, and if the area is appropriate, then they'll nest there and you'll end up with your phosphate fertilizer. But it's a limited resource because the seagulls spent hundreds of thousands of years building up that big pile of waste with those phosphates in it, and we mine it, and we probably mine it faster than the seagulls transport it there. So eventually it runs out. I think that's why Nauru has, I think they limited the amount of phosphates they can, maybe they don't even do it anymore, I'm not sure. There's another kind of, remember I did industrial, so phosphates, well, phosphates are important because all plants, they need phosphorus to grow. If you put phosphorus superphosphate, it's called superphosphate fertilizer. If you put superphosphate fertilizer on your plants, they'll grow better. Okay, there's another kind of fertilizer class as well. Nitrogen fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizers are made from, it's called Haber process or Haber-Bosch. I always learned it as Haber-Bosch process, but I'm not sure why, but they seem to just say Haber process now. Haber process is the artificial ammonia, which is made out of natural gas, and the ammonia makes ammonium nitrate fertilizers, which are, what do we call it? Nitrates. So got phosphates and nitrates. So you've got the nitrate fertilizers. We call them nitrogen phosphate. There's a thing called NPK value of fertilizer. So you have nitrates, phosphorus, and potassium. The other one's potassium. I'm not sure where potassium comes from. Maybe, well, potassium's a salt. So there's possibly some places where there's some kinds of special salt deposits. How would you get some salt deposit? Not really sure. I don't know much about it. It might come to me, but I haven't really thought about it. I think they mine it in inland places, which makes me think that it's dried up salt beds that are now located in inland or up mountains, because geology's changed in time. Yeah, so countries that have a lot of natural gas can make fertilizers, nitrate fertilizers, and so a lot of that comes from Russia. And I don't know if we make it ourselves. We probably make it ourselves in New Zealand. I think we have natural gas. We definitely do. Not much, but we have some. And if we would want to use that effectively rather than just burning it, then maybe making it into fertilizers is a sensible thing to do. But if you add fertilizer to your already pretty good soil, you can grow more crops and have more food for your animals to eat. And then you can make more milk. And when you make more milk, you can sell that to people overseas. So there's a lot of people have been looking at these things called ESGs, which is environmental and social governance, which I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical, you know, because quite often when people make things that have, when they market, they make a big deal out of pointing out the things. I remember one of my friends, he once said that quite a lot of people, they tend to market things actually on a weakness of their product, which is quite interesting. And I can't think of you know, you have some marketing slogan for some product, and they you know, cleans and shines without scratching. Okay, like, so you've got some product, a cleaner, and they say cleans and shines without scratching, and it's like, that's weird, because is scratching a major problem with cleaning things? Because, you know, like, I always think like soaps and detergents, they don't have any hard parts in them. There's no gritty material in there, so why would you need a marketing slogan that says cleans and shines without scratching? And the product which uses a slogan somewhat like that, it has very fine polishing particulates in it, which actually makes it quite a good cleaner, because it can clean deposits of layered up stuff by gently scraping the layers off. And so other cleaning products don't use this method of, it's not mechanical, they use a chemical cleaning process, whereas this is a mechanical cleaning process. And so they emphasize that their product cleans and shines without scratching, but other kinds of cleaners can't scratch the things that you're trying to clean, because they are chemical cleaners and not mechanical cleaners. And so anyway, so it comes back to, what's my point? When they make a big deal about, when you see some product being advertised and they make a big deal about some particular property of it, quite often they've centered their marketing on a thing that is generally a failure in that type of product. And so I find that actually fascinating. I've just noticed my video window's a little bit askew and it annoys me, so I'm just fixing it. There we go. So that is kind of interesting. So they've made a big deal out of certain things, like this ESG thing recently, and so I'm skeptical of it, because people tend to, it's kind of a marketing tell, right? They tend to be obsessed with that particular thing, and they spend a lot of effort in trying to tell you how that thing is very good. And often something's marketed on a weak point, and the people that are marketing it are psychologically locked into that weak point. So I'm skeptical about the ESG thing. Now I understand that Sri Lanka, they were quite concerned with their ESG scores, and so one of the things that they thought they could do to improve their ESG scores, which is the environmental part, was to import less artificial fertilizer, or use less artificial fertilizer, and also to decrease the amount of fossil fuels they were importing or using and importing. And so they did both of those things too much too quickly, and it collapsed the economy. So that's something that people need to be cautious about. And then I did have one more thought. So I did this without writing anything down. What was the other thought? Yes. So the important thing, the way that you rate countries, how do you actually rate countries to work out whether their production is beneficial, considering how much damage that country might do to the environment through its industrial processes? And I think like one of the ways that you should measure this is you need to measure the net food surplus of the country for the amount of emissions or environmental damage. And so some countries you might think are very good because they don't appear to be doing very much environmental damage, but in fact they don't make very much of their own food. And I was looking at countries that were in this category, and I kind of think that may be Belgium. Belgium might be actually pretty terrible, and so I think Belgium, I can't remember, I looked it up, I felt like they only make 67% of their food that they consume themselves. So for whatever their emissions are, they have emissions, but they don't make enough food to cover the emissions that they make. So they can't feed their population for their quantity of emissions. But then if you look at France, France has same or less emissions per capita, but they make a surplus of food. So I think French people are making 115% surplus of food. No, 15% surplus. They make 115% of what they need, roughly. It's just doesn't matter. Doesn't matter specifically what the numbers are. The general gist of the numbers is what I put it. Whether it's 120 or 105%, it doesn't matter. They make more food than what they need, and the amount of food more that they make would be able to feed Belgium, which is good because I think the neighbours, right? So that's kind of what you want. So if you want to order all of the countries in the world, you should order them not by what their just strictly what their emissions are, but their emissions divided by the amount of food surplus. So you can see the countries that are actually have the least emissions for most surplus food. That's actually very important. And I haven't seen tables that are organized in this way. They might exist, and politicians should care to look at them. They should care to look at them because it's actually very important. And so I think that there's some countries that you kind of think are kind of interesting. I think maybe Chile and Argentina and New Zealand and Australia and Netherlands. We are net food producers. We make, so, I can't remember, there were some of those countries in South America make 200%. They make enough to feed their population and the equivalent of their whole population again. So of course their emissions need to be considered as half because they make twice as much food. And in New Zealand we actually just get a 42% discount on our emissions because we produce much more food than our emissions stand for. And I think that's the way that you need to look at that. And if you're not doing it that way, then you're not being fair. And you'd be like, yeah, but food's not the only export that countries have. But the important thing is it's the only export that actually counts, you know, because most people, they don't need, if push comes to shove, they don't need anything else. They just need the food, right? That's the actual thing that you can't, it's not optional. The quantity of food available in your country isn't optional. If you don't have enough food, you don't have enough food. And it doesn't matter the amount of accounting that you do. Accounting for emissions or numbers on a spreadsheet or saying how educated you are or how wealthy you are. It doesn't matter if you don't have the food. You need the food. The food is the primary important thing. And so that's the thing that actually your emission should be mathematically checked against. Yeah, so that's it. That's my story. It's a little bit complicated, but I hope that kind of makes some sense and it should give some context. And of course in this video there's a lot of background information, things that I've left out, but you can see that stuff in the news. I just think that's the thing that's important. Anyway, that's my video. It's just an idea I had. I don't know if this is going to be a good video for people out in the world to see. Quite honestly, I think it's got stuff in it that people can't really understand, and some of the important people who can't really understand the thing that I'm saying are politicians, which means that those people shouldn't be running countries. We should vote for different people in your country. There we go. If you think your politicians don't understand the thing that I said, don't vote for them, and encourage your friends not to vote for them. We need smarter people. We need smarter people who actually have some kind of systems thinking, that actually understand what the important things in the economy are. That's just my thoughts. My personal thoughts. It's just an idea. Could be wrong. It could be wrong. If you think I'm wrong, write a very complicated reply with many paragraphs so that you can get your point out there. And then I can think about that, and then I can put that back into my thinking so I can think differently. Okay, thanks for watching. Take care. See you later.